The alien plasma blade flashed towards the kneeling girl's throat, her emerald eyes filled with resignation as she prepared to meet her end. No one dared to defy the edict of isolation on the war-torn surface of Vortis 7, except Sergeant Marcus Hale, a battle-hardened human soldier. As Marcus stormed through the crowd of Centauri, his pulse rifle trained on the High Priestess Thava, he knew there was no turning back. The atmosphere was tense, with both human and alien forces on edge, waiting for the moment when everything would unravel. For Marcus, this was not just another mission. The memories of his daughter, lost to a cruel twist of fate, haunted him, driving him forward. He couldn't let another innocent die, not if he could prevent it. As the Centauri priestess prepared to deliver the final blow, Marcus acted. A single pulse shot rang out, and the blade was knocked aside, saving the girl by a hair's breadth. Chaos erupted as Marcus charged, his armor absorbing the blows from the Centauri warriors. He fought with a ferocity born of desperation, carving a path to the girl. Blood and sparks flew as Marcus clashed with the Centauri, his pulse rifle now a blunt weapon in close quarters. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal, but Marcus didn't falter. His sole focus was on the girl, her pale skin now smeared with dirt and blood, her eyes wide with shock as she watched the carnage unfold around her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus reached her. He knelt down, shielding her with his own body as he fired off another burst of pulse rounds, forcing the Centauri to retreat momentarily. The girl looked up at him, her expression a mix of fear and confusion. "Why? Why did you save me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Marcus didn't have time for explanations. "We need to move now," he barked, grabbing her hand and pulling her to her feet. She stumbled, still in shock, but Marcus didn't let go. With one arm around her shoulders, he led her through the throng of Centauri warriors, each step a battle for survival. As they fought their way toward the edge of the battlefield, Marcus's mind raced. He knew they were running out of time. The Alliance forces were closing in, and if they were captured, the girl would be executed, and he would be labeled a traitor. But Marcus had made his choice. He would protect this girl, no matter the cost. They reached the edge of the battlefield, where the dense jungle of Vortis 7 loomed like a dark, impenetrable wall. Without hesitation, Marcus plunged into the underbrush, the girl stumbling along beside him. The sounds of battle faded behind them, replaced by the eerie silence of the jungle. For hours, they trekked through the dense foliage, the girl growing weaker with each step. Marcus knew they needed to find shelter, and soon. The jungle was a dangerous place, filled with predators and deadly traps left behind by the planet's original inhabitants. But Marcus had no choice. They had to keep moving. As night fell, they finally came across a small clearing, hidden deep within the jungle. Marcus quickly set up a makeshift camp, using the last of his energy to create a protective barrier around them. The girl collapsed onto the ground, too exhausted to protest as Marcus tended to her wounds. As he worked, he couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. This girl, whoever she was clearly important to the Centauri. Important enough to risk a full-scale war over. But why? And what did she mean to the Alliance? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft groan from the girl. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked up at Marcus with a pained expression. I didn't ask for this," she murmured, her voice weak. "I just wanted to be free." Marcus's heart ached at her words. He didn't know what her story was, but he could see the pain in her eyes. "I know," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "But you're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you." The girl gave him a small, grateful smile before her eyes closed again, her body finally succumbing to exhaustion. Marcus watched over her as she slept, his mind still racing with questions. He knew they couldn't stay here for long. The Centauri would be hunting them, and it was only a matter of time before they found their trail. But for now, all he could do was wait and hope that they could find a way out of this mess. that they could survive long enough to figure out what the hell was going on. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the jungle canopy, Marcus knew it was time to move again. He gently shook the girl awake, his voice low and soothing. "We need to go," he said, helping her to her feet. "There's a place, deep in the jungle. An ancient temple. It might be our only chance." The girl nodded, too tired to argue, and together they set off into the unknown, their fates now intertwined in a desperate bid for survival. The jungle was dense, alive with the sounds of unseen creatures, and the thick canopy above made it feel as though they were walking through twilight, even in the early hours of the day. Marcus and the girl moved cautiously, their senses heightened by the looming danger. Every rustle of leaves, every distant animal call, kept them on edge. The girl, whose name Marcus still didn't know, struggled to keep up. Her small frame was clearly not built for this kind of terrain, but she pushed on with a determination that Marcus couldn't help but admire. He slowed his pace, offering her support when she stumbled over roots or slipped on the damp ground. As they walked, Marcus tried to piece together what he knew about the Xentari and their obsession with this girl. The Xentari were a mysterious alien race, fiercely protective of their traditions and territory. They had been at odds with humanity ever since the first contact, but this was different. The lengths they were going to recapture the girl suggested she was more than just a political pawn. "We're close," Marcus said after hours of silent trekking. He could feel the subtle change in the air, the way the jungle seemed to part for them as they neared their destination. The temple was an ancient structure, rumored to be a relic of a civilization long gone. It was said to be a place of immense power, where secrets of the universe were guarded by forces beyond understanding. The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's our only hope," Marcus replied, glancing around the clearing that had just come into view. In the center stood a stone temple, its walls covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and move in the dappled light. It was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen, and he felt a strange pull towards it, as if it were calling out to him. They approached cautiously, the girl clinging to Marcus's side, as they climbed the steps leading to the temple entrance. The air grew cooler, almost oppressively so, and Marcus felt a shiver run down his spine. The doorway was dark, the interior of the temple shrouded in shadow, but there was no turning back now. With a deep breath, Marcus stepped inside, pulling the girl along with him. The interior was vast, with high ceilings and walls that seemed to stretch into infinity. Strange symbols glowed faintly on the walls, illuminating their path as they ventured deeper into the temple. "This place, it feels alive," the girl said, her voice tinged with awe and fear. She reached out to touch one of the glowing symbols, and it pulsed in response, sending a ripple of light across the room. Marcus watched her, a growing sense of unease gnawing at him. "What do you mean?" he asked, his hand instinctively tightening around his rifle. It's like the temple knows we're here," she replied, her eyes wide as she looked around the room. "I can feel it. It's trying to communicate with me." Before Marcus could respond, the ground beneath them trembled, and the air was filled with a low, rumbling sound. The symbols on the walls flared to life, their light growing brighter and more intense. The girl cried out in alarm, and Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her back towards the entrance. But it was too late. The door behind them slammed shut with a deafening crash, trapping them inside. Marcus spun around, his heart racing as he scanned the room for any sign of danger. But all he saw was the glowing symbols, their light pulsating in a strange, hypnotic rhythm. "What's happening?" the girl asked, her voice trembling with fear. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. "But we need to stay calm. There has to be a way out of here." As they stood there, trying to make sense of their surroundings, the symbols began to shift and change, forming patterns that were almost recognizable. Marcus stared at them, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. It was as if the temple was trying to show them something, to communicate in a language beyond words. And then, without warning, the light coalesced into a single, blinding beam that shot towards the center of the room. Marcus shielded his eyes, but the girl stepped forward, drawn towards the light as if in a trance. "Wait," Marcus called out, but she didn't stop. She reached the center of the room and placed her hands on the glowing symbol that had appeared on the floor. The light intensified, enveloping her in a radiant glow that was almost too bright to look at. Marcus watched in stunned silence as the light seemed to seep into her, merging with her very being. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light vanished, leaving the girl standing there, her eyes closed and her body trembling. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked, rushing to her side. The girl opened her eyes, and Marcus was taken aback by the change he saw in her. Her eyes were now glowing with the same light as the symbols on the walls, and there was a newfound strength in her posture. She looked at him, a calm smile on her lips. "I understand now," she said softly. "I know why they were after me. I know what I have to do." Marcus frowned, his concern growing. "What do you mean? What happened to you?" "The temple. It showed me the truth," she explained, her voice steady and sure. "The Centauri weren't just after me because I'm different. They were trying to stop me from fulfilling my destiny." "And what is that?" Marcus asked, his mind racing with questions. "I have the power to stop the war," she said, her eyes glowing brighter. "I can bring peace to our worlds, but only if we reach the core of this planet. The temple was just the first step." Marcus's mind reeled at the implications of her words. Could it be true? Could this girl, barely more than a child, really be the key to ending the conflict that had torn their worlds apart? He didn't know, but he was willing to find out. "Then we'll do it together," he said, determination filling his voice. "We'll reach the core, and we'll end this war once and for all." The girl nodded, her expression resolute. "Yes, together." And with that, they turned and headed deeper into the temple, the path ahead uncertain, but their resolve unshakable. Part 3. Into the depths. The deeper they ventured into the temple, the more surreal their surroundings became. The walls seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and the air grew thick with a sense of ancient power. Marcus kept a tight grip on his pulse rifle, his eyes scanning every shadow for signs of danger. But the girl, who had revealed her name as Lyra, seemed unfazed, her glowing eyes fixed on the path ahead. As they descended into the depths of the temple, the temperature dropped, and the light from the glowing symbols became their only source of illumination. The tunnel they followed twisted and turned, leading them ever downward, into the heart of the planet. After what felt like hours of walking, they reached a massive chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center of the room was a large, circular platform, surrounded by strange, alien machinery that hummed with a low, ominous sound. Lyra approached the platform, her expression serious. "This is it," she said, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "The core is just beyond this gate. We have to activate the controls and stabilize it before it's too late." Marcus looked around, his unease growing. "And what happens if we don't?" "The planet will tear itself apart," Lyra replied, her tone grim. "And it won't stop there. The energy release will create a rift in space-time, a portal to the dimension of the Scourge. If that happens, nothing in the galaxy will be safe." Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. The Scourge was a name that struck fear into the hearts of every living being. A malevolent force from another dimension, it had wiped out entire civilizations before being sealed away by an ancient alliance of species. The thought of it being unleashed again was terrifying. "Then let's get to work," Marcus said, steeling himself for the task ahead. He followed Lyra to the control panel, which was covered in alien symbols and switches. She began to manipulate the controls, her hands moving with a confidence that Marcus couldn't help but admire. But as they worked, the chamber suddenly shook with a violent tremor, and the machinery around them flared to life, emitting sparks and strange, dissonant sounds. Marcus cursed under his breath, his heart pounding as the platform began to glow with a blinding light. "What's happening?" he shouted, trying to be heard over the deafening noise. Lyra's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "The core's destabilizing. Someone must have triggered a failsafe." Before she could finish, the platform beneath them lurched, and Marcus felt a sickening drop in his stomach as they were propelled downward at breakneck speed. The walls of the chamber blurred as they were thrust into a tunnel, the light around them flickering wildly. Marcus grabbed onto Lyra, pulling her close as they hurtled deeper into the planet's core. The noise was deafening, and the air around them crackled with electricity. He had no idea where they were headed or how they would survive this, but he knew they had to hold on. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the descent stopped. They were thrown onto solid ground, the platform beneath them grinding to a halt. Marcus groaned in pain as he struggled to his feet, his muscles aching from the impact. Lyra was already standing, her eyes wide as she looked around at their new surroundings. They were in a vast cavern, the walls lined with strange, glowing crystals that cast an eerie light over the scene. In the center of the cavern was a massive, pulsating sphere of energy, suspended in the air by columns of alien machinery. "The core," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with awe and dread. Marcus stared at the sphere, his heart pounding. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, a swirling mass of raw power that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The air around it crackled with energy, and the ground beneath their feet trembled with the force of its power. "We need to stabilize it," Lyra said, her voice shaking. "But I don't know if we have enough time." Marcus turned to her, his expression determined. "We'll make time. Tell me what to do." Lyra nodded, her fear giving way to resolve. She quickly explained the process, guiding Marcus through the steps to reroute the energy flow and stabilize the core. It was a delicate and dangerous task, and Marcus knew that one wrong move could spell disaster. As they worked, the cavern shook with increasing intensity, and the air grew thick with tension. The core's energy pulsed erratically, and Marcus could feel the heat emanating from it, growing more intense by the second. "We're running out of time," Lyra shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the unstable core. Marcus gritted his teeth, his hands moving faster as he adjusted the controls. He could feel the sweat dripping down his face, his heart pounding in his chest. They were so close, just a few more adjustments, and they would have it under control. But then, the ground beneath them gave a violent lurch, and Marcus was thrown off balance, his hand slipping from the controls. He cursed, his mind racing as he tried to regain control, but it was too late. The core's energy flared, and the machinery around them erupted in a shower of sparks. "No!" Lyra screamed, her voice filled with despair. The core pulsed one final time, and then, with a deafening roar, it exploded. Marcus's world was consumed by light and sound as the core detonated. The force of the explosion sent him flying across the cavern, slamming him into the hard, unforgiving ground. He felt the impact reverberate through his bones, knocking the wind out of him and leaving him gasping for breath. For a few terrifying moments, everything was chaos. The ground shook violently, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of the core's energy as it ripped through the cavern. Marcus could barely see through the blinding light, his vision blurred by the intensity of the explosion. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos subsided. The light dimmed, and the roaring noise faded into an eerie silence. Marcus lay on the ground, his body aching from the impact, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up, his eyes scanning the cavern for any sign of Lyra. The once vast chamber was now a ruin, the walls cracked and crumbling, the alien machinery reduced to twisted, smoking wreckage. The core, the massive sphere of energy that had dominated the cavern, was gone, leaving behind only a dark, gaping void. "Lyra," Marcus called out, his voice hoarse and shaky. There was no response. Panic surged through him as he stumbled to his feet, his eyes searching the wreckage for any sign of the girl. He couldn't lose her now, not after everything they had been through. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement. A small, pale figure was lying amidst the rubble, barely visible through the smoke and dust. Marcus's heart leaped, and he rushed over, ignoring the pain in his limbs as he scrambled across the debris. "Lyra!" he shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. She was alive, but just barely. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow, and her eyes were closed, her face etched with pain. Marcus's hands trembled as he gently lifted her into his arms, cradling her fragile form. "Come on, Lyra," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Don't give up on me now." Her eyelids fluttered, and she let out a soft groan, her eyes slowly opening to meet his. There was a flicker of recognition in her gaze, and she managed a weak smile. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Hey," he said, forcing a smile of his own. "You're going to be okay, all right. We're going to get out of here." Lyra's eyes flicked to the void where the core had once been, and her expression darkened. "It's too late," she said, her voice filled with sorrow. "The core, it's gone. I failed." Marcus shook his head, his grip on her tightening. "No, you didn't. We're still here, aren't we? That means there's still a chance." But Lyra's eyes were filled with tears, and Marcus could see the despair in her gaze. "The Scourge, it's coming. Without the core, there's nothing to stop it." Marcus's heart sank as the weight of her words hit him. The Scourge, the malevolent force that had been sealed away for millennia, was about to be unleashed upon the galaxy, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. But he couldn't let that happen. He wouldn't. "We'll find another way," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We'll stop the Scourge, no matter what it takes." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "But how? We don't even know where it will come from." "We'll figure it out," Marcus replied, his mind racing with possibilities. "But first, we need to get out of here. We need to regroup, find help, and come up with a plan." Lyra nodded weakly, and Marcus gently lifted her into his arms, cradling her close as he began to make his way out of the ruined cavern. The path ahead was uncertain, and the odds were stacked against them, but Marcus refused to give up. He had come too far to let it end like this. As they emerged from the depths of the temple, the jungle around them was eerily quiet, the air thick with tension. The sky above was dark, filled with ominous clouds that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. Marcus glanced up, his heart heavy with dread. The Scourge was coming, and the galaxy was running out of time. But as he looked down at Lyra, her eyes filled with a quiet determination, he knew they still had a chance. Together, they would find a way to stop the darkness that was about to be unleashed. The journey back through the jungle was grueling, every step a battle against exhaustion and despair. Marcus carried Lyra as best as he could, his muscles aching with the strain, but he refused to slow down. The ominous clouds above continued to darken, and the air was thick with the promise of an impending storm. As they moved, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The jungle was alive with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant animal calls, but there was something else, something lurking just beyond the edge of his vision. He kept his pulse rifle at the ready, his senses on high alert. After what felt like an eternity, they finally reached the edge of the jungle, emerging into a clearing that overlooked a vast, sprawling valley. In the distance, Marcus could see the ruins of an ancient city, its crumbling towers silhouetted against the darkening sky. "We're almost there," Marcus said, his voice strained with exhaustion. "We just need to reach the city. There might be something there that can help us." Lyra nodded weakly, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to stop the Scourge," she said, her voice trembling with fear and resolve. "It's our only chance." As they descended into the valley, The wind began to pick up, whipping through the trees with an eerie, howling sound. The ground beneath their feet trembled with each step, and the sky above crackled with lightning. It was as if the very planet itself was reacting to the impending arrival of the Scourge. Marcus quickened his pace, his heart pounding in his chest. They had to reach the city before it was too late. He could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him, the knowledge that the fate of the galaxy rested on their shoulders. They reached the outskirts of the city just as the first drops of rain began to fall, the sky above now a swirling maelstrom of dark clouds and lightning. The streets were deserted, the buildings crumbling and overgrown with vegetation. It was clear that this place had been abandoned long ago, but there was something about it, an energy, a presence, that made Marcus feel like they weren't alone. As they made their way through the ruins, Marcus's pulse rifle trained on every shadow. They finally reached the central square. In the center of the square stood a massive, stone structure, its walls covered in the same glowing symbols they had seen in the temple. "This is it," Lara said, her voice filled with awe. "This is where we make our stand." Marcus nodded, his grip on his rifle tightening. "What do we need to do?" Lyra approached the structure, her hands tracing the symbols on the walls. "We need to activate the ancient defenses," she explained. "It's the only way to hold off the Scourge long enough for us to find a way to stop it." As she worked, Marcus stood guard, his eyes scanning the ruins for any sign of movement. The air was thick with tension, and he could feel the storm closing in around them. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the wind howled through the streets with an almost mournful sound. And then, just as Lyra activated the final symbol, the sky above erupted in a blinding flash of light. Marcus shielded his eyes, his heart racing as the light intensified, filling the entire city with a searing white glow. When the light finally faded, Marcus lowered his arm, his eyes widening in shock. The sky above was no longer dark and stormy. Instead, it was filled with a swirling vortex of energy, a portal to the dimension of the Scourge. "They're here," Lyra whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Marcus gritted his teeth, his pulse rifle at the ready. "Then let's give them a fight they won't forget." As the portal continued to expand, the air around them crackled with energy, and the ground beneath their feet shook with increasing intensity. And then, with a deafening roar, the first of the Scourge emerged from the portal, a massive, monstrous creature, its body writhing with tendrils of dark energy. Marcus opened fire, his pulse rounds slamming into the creature with little effect. The Scourge let out a horrific screech, its eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence as it charged towards them. "Lyra, get to the controls," Marcus shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the battle. "I'll hold them off." Lyra hesitated for a moment, her eyes filled with fear, but then she nodded, turning and sprinting towards the ancient structure. Marcus stood his ground, his pulse rifle firing relentlessly as more Scourge creatures began to emerge from the portal. The battle was fierce and chaotic, the air filled with the sound of gunfire and the screams of the Scourge. Marcus fought with everything he had, his body pushed to its limits as he held the line. But he knew it was only a matter of time before they were overwhelmed. "Lyra, hurry," he shouted, his voice strained with effort. "I'm almost there," Lyra called back, her hands working frantically at the controls. But just as she was about to activate the defenses, a massive Scourge creature lunged towards her, its tendrils reaching out to ensnare her. Marcus's heart leaped in his chest, and he sprinted towards her, firing his rifle as he ran. "Get away from her," he roared, his voice filled with fury. With a final burst of energy, Marcus threw himself between Lyra and the Scourge, his pulse rifle firing at point-blank range. The creature let out a shriek of pain, its tendrils recoiling as Marcus stood his ground. "Lyra, do it now," he shouted, his voice filled with desperation. Lyra's hands flew over the controls, and with a final, decisive motion, she activated the ancient defenses. The ground beneath them rumbled, and the air was filled with a deafening roar as massive energy beams shot out from the structure, targeting the Scourge with pinpoint accuracy. The creatures let out horrific screams as they were blasted apart, their bodies disintegrating into nothingness. The portal above began to shrink, the swirling vortex of energy collapsing in on itself as the defenses continued to fire. Marcus collapsed to the ground, his body shaking with exhaustion as the last of the Scourge was obliterated. The city fell silent, the storm above dissipating as the portal finally closed. "It's over," Lyra whispered, her voice filled with relief. Marcus looked up at her, his heart swelling with pride. "We did it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But even as the words left his lips, Marcus knew that their victory had come at a great cost. The galaxy was safe for now, but the Scourge would not be gone forever. And when they returned, Marcus knew that he and Lyra would be there to face them together. The aftermath of the battle was a sobering sight. The once grand city lay in ruins, its ancient structures reduced to rubble by the fierce onslaught of the Scourge. The air was heavy with the acrid scent of smoke and scorched earth, and the silence that had settled over the battlefield was eerie, almost oppressive. Marcus and Lyra stood side by side, their bodies weary from the intense battle. Marcus's pulse rifle hung loosely at his side, the barrel still warm from the relentless firing. His muscles ached, his mind reeling from the events that had transpired. But there was a sense of relief in the air, a quiet acknowledgement that they had survived against all odds. Lyra, her glowing eyes dimmed by exhaustion, looked up at Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. "We stopped them," she said, her voice tinged with weariness. "But at what cost?" Marcus nodded, his gaze sweeping over the devastation around them. The city that had once been a beacon of hope was now a graveyard, its ancient secrets lost to the violence of the battle. "We did what we had to do," he replied, his voice steady but filled with the weight of their actions. "But you're right. The price was high." Lyra's expression softened, her eyes reflecting the shared burden they now carried. "The Scourge may be gone for now, but they'll be back. We can't let our guard down." "I know," Marcus said, his tone resolute, "but we'll be ready when they return. We've proven that we can fight back, that we're not just going to roll over and let them take what they want." Lyra nodded, a glimmer of determination returning to her eyes. "And we'll keep fighting. Together." Marcus smiled, a rare expression of warmth breaking through the grimness of the moment. "Together," he echoed, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. As they turned to leave the ruins of the city behind, Marcus couldn't help but think about the future. The Scourge had been a formidable enemy, one that had pushed them to the brink of destruction. But they had survived, and in doing so, they had uncovered a strength within themselves that they hadn't known existed. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but Marcus knew that they were not alone. They had each other, and that was enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they made their way back through the jungle, the storm clouds that had once loomed so ominously overhead began to clear, revealing a sky that was slowly brightening with the first rays of dawn. It was a small, but powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always the promise of a new beginning. The journey back to the human settlement was one of quiet reflection. The jungle that had once seemed so foreboding now felt strangely peaceful, as if the land itself was slowly beginning to heal from the battle that had been fought. Marcus and Lyra walked in silence, their minds occupied with thoughts of what lay ahead. When they finally reached the outskirts of the settlement, they were met with a mixture of shock and relief. The soldiers and civilians who had been left behind during the mission rushed forward to greet them, their faces a blend of disbelief and hope. Marcus felt a surge of emotion as he realized that they had been feared lost, that their return was a sign of victory that no one had dared to believe in. As they entered the settlement, Marcus was approached by Commander Holt, the leader of the human forces on Vortis 7. Holt's expression was one of cautious optimism, tempered by the knowledge of what had been sacrificed to achieve this victory. Sergeant Hale, Holt said, his voice gruff but respectful. You've done us all a great service. The Scourge, I can't believe they're gone. For now, Marcus replied, his tone measured. But they'll be back. And when they do, we need to be ready. Holt nodded, his expression serious. Agreed. We'll start preparing immediately. But for now, you and the girl deserve some rest. Lyra, who had been standing quietly by Marcus's side, looked up at Holt with a small smile. Thank you, Commander. But there's still so much to do. We can't afford to stop now. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of reassurance. We'll get through this, Lyra. Together. The days that followed were a blur of activity as the settlement began to rebuild and fortify itself against the inevitable return of the Scourge. Marcus and Lyra were at the center of these efforts, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They trained together, strategized together, and worked tirelessly to ensure that the settlement was as prepared as it could be for the battles to come. But amidst the preparations, there were also moments of quiet reflection, moments where they could take a step back and appreciate what they had accomplished. They had faced an unimaginable threat and emerged victorious, and that victory had forged a bond between them that would never be broken. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting the jungle in a warm golden light, Marcus and Lyra sat together on a hill overlooking the settlement. The air was cool and crisp, and the sky was clear, free of the ominous clouds that had once loomed so heavily overhead. It's beautiful, Lyra said softly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Marcus nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. It is. And it's worth fighting for. Lyra turned to him, her expression thoughtful. What do you think will happen when the Scourge returns? Will we be ready? We'll be ready, Marcus said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. And we won't be alone. We've proven that we can stand up to them, that we can fight back. And when the time comes, we'll do it again. Lyra smiled, her eyes shining with a mixture of hope and determination. I believe you. And I'm glad. I'm glad that I have you by my side. Me too, Marcus replied, his tone warm. We've come a long way, Lyra, and we've got a long way to go. But whatever happens, we'll face it together. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in twilight, Marcus and Lyra sat in comfortable silence, their minds at ease for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The future was uncertain, and the battles ahead would be fierce, but they were ready. Together, they would face whatever challenges came their way. Together, they would fight for a better future, and together, they would protect the galaxy from the darkness that threatened to consume it. As the first stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Marcus and Lyra stood up, their resolve unshakable. The journey was far from over, but they were ready to face it, side by side, as they had from the very beginning. And with that, they turned and walked back towards the settlement, their hearts filled with hope and determination, ready to face whatever came next.